Hey everybody, welcome to this month's gigs. I want to kind of apologize for not having a full panel this month. I kind of ran into some difficulties scheduling things, planning things, and kind of last minute was unable to get a group together. So you just have me this month. Don't worry, next month I have a pretty cool panel that we will be doing. So make sure to come back and join us again next month. So what's this month about? This month is pretty simple. I just want to kind of sit and go through some of the questions that haven't been answered before, and then just kind of one-on-one chat with anybody that wants to chat about their career, the industry, and any questions they might have related to those types of things. So this really is kind of a time to ask as many questions as you want to ask, because I'm going to be answering anything you have in relation to the game industry or your career within the industry. So it's not limited to programmers or designers or anything like that, but really any position. So feel free to ask any questions in the chat on the side there, and I will get to them as I get to them. So I'm going to start with some questions that were asked on previous panels that weren't fully answered. Some of them I'll do my best to answer. Some of them, I can't really answer all the way through because, it's just me. So a couple questions from the design panel. So Eric had asked, what do you look for when looking through code and scripting samples? So this is a good question, not just for design, but also for programming. And I always tell people the first thing to look for is that the code is readable. Second thing to look for is that there are no major errors in the code. So for example, memory leaks or just inconsistencies. I want to see that you're writing code eloquently, I guess is the best way to say it, but very much succinctly and explaining yourself. I also want to see that you comment the code pretty extensively, not every line, but that I understand what each function's doing. The other day I was reviewing code of someone who was going to work for a client, and they submitted just kind of the main CPP or something like that. So it looked to me like they had just had all their classes and all their work in one file. And it was like a 1,500 line file, but I had no context of all the functions that they were calling. So if you're calling a bunch of functions that I don't have the context of, make sure that you're either including those files as well or documenting what those do. So I think usually what I'm looking for is 1 to 2 files or classes specifically to look at. So that's what I look for when I'm looking at coding and scripting samples. I'm sure other people look for different things, but they're not here. Haha, so it's just me. Matthew McComber asked during the design panel, what was your first significant design project and how did that set you on the path to where you are today? So this is an interesting one for me because I was a designer for a while, and I guess my first major one outside of school was a project called Funkier Monkey 2, which was a sequel to a game called Funky Monkey. And I basically just documented the project. The design was pretty much done when I got it, but they just wanted someone to document it and then make sure that things were going well on the project and that it was following the design that was set forward. So I just started out simply as kind of the person who was owning the design, but also just was documenting the design. And then eventually that turned into me making my own designs from there. So yeah, Matthew had another question. In regards to design, what inspires you? For me, everything inspires me. Board games, other video games, movies, walking outside in the environment. Really, I've talked to hundreds of designers about this because it's really interesting to me. And I think the universal thing is that designers get inspired from everywhere, right? I'll never forget, I took one of the designers we went to a Muse concert together, and the concert ended and he kind of looked at me and just had this really sad look on his face, and he was like, I will never make a user experience as great as that concert. And I said, well, you have two options. You can either wallow in that fact, or we can go back to work tomorrow morning and decide that we want nothing short of that great of an experience for the player. So it's really any kind of experience can inspire you to do great design work, or really just any work in video games in general. I think that's not just for design, but really for everything. Just getting that inspiration from a lot of different places. And I think what's really important is that you're experiencing a lot of different things, right? Sorry, I just went over to the chat, and for a second I was like, I can't hear anything, and then realized I had muted the video. So I just wanted to make sure that the sound was working there. But yeah, so really, you should feel inspired from anywhere and everywhere. And I think what's important is that you don't just play video games all the time to get your inspiration, because if that's the only thing you do to get inspired to make games, your games are going to be pretty boring. So yeah. Why do meetings at work make me tired? Doug asks. Um, a lot of different reasons. You can get into the physical sense, which is if a bunch of people are in a room with no air outlet, then that'll make you tired. I know that sounds really weird to say, but that's actually true, because everybody's kind of using up the oxygen in the room. So I always tell people, leave doors open, make sure the air is flowing. The other thing is that if things aren't functional, like things aren't happening in the meeting, then you're just going to feel disappointed and kind of depressed. I could get on my horse about meetings, but I'm not going to do that. So Doug had some questions that he had asked on Facebook. What are some big mistakes that someone can make? Common mistakes that a lot of people make. Mistakes that you have made. I'm asking because I just spent an hour or two debugging because I forgot to reset a bool. Yeah, I mean, I've done that. My original code samples had a memory leak in them. That was a pretty big mistake, but I still somehow managed to get jobs even with that. What are some big mistakes I've made? I think probably the biggest mistake that I've made in my career is being too emotionally invested in my work. And this took a long time for me to figure out. Basically, I was so invested in what I was doing that any negative thing that happened could ruin my day. And so I was so tied into work and so tied into my projects that, if someone played our game and wrote a negative review, then I would get really mad and really upset, or like blame myself and get really like down on it. But when I finally learned that I could do good work, do great work, and be semi-emotionally invested, but not put my entire being into each project, I started being much happier in my life and in my work. So that was a big mistake, and I see a lot of people make that. So it's my biggest mistake, but I also think it's one of the most common mistakes. I think another common mistake people don't do is you should take a video or take a vacation after you launch a title, because there's going to be a lot of stress leading up to it and a lot of stress right after when you release it. And then there's this whole relief thing. And I always tell people to take a vacation either once the project goes gold, but before it goes live, or after it's been live for a little bit. Take a nice vacation where you just disconnect from everything. I do think people get too into reading reviews for their projects, and I think that there's one level where you're learning from that, where you're reading and you're learning from the mistakes that you've made and the feedback that you're getting. But more than likely, at least this has been my case when I read reviews, I knew everything that was wrong with the project. I knew all of it, right? And I knew what needed to be fixed. We didn't have time to do it. So reading the reviews, I thought would make me feel like, haha, I'm justified in my opinion. But all it did was make me more sad that we couldn't finish those things. So yeah, those are a couple different things. If you have any more follow-ups to that, or if you have mistakes that you've made, feel free to comment those. Yeah, he clarified not so much from the angle that mistakes are terrible, but more from we are all humans and we make mistakes. Yeah, I think making mistakes is huge. Failure is really important to growth and learning. There's a really famous story about an executive, I think it was at GE, who made like a $30,000 or $30 million mistake, right? Lots of money lost. And he went to the CEO and said, well, I'm here to give you my resignation. And he's like, why are you resigning? He's like, well, I figured you'd fire me because I made such a huge mistake. And he said, I just spent $30 million teaching you not to make that mistake again. You're not quitting. And it really is true. Mistakes are investments into yourself, about getting, about learning and becoming a better person. So I think looking at your mistakes as growth opportunities as opposed to failure is really important. Cool. Got some questions coming in. Chris Pioli asked earlier on Facebook. First off, I'm going to plug his game Eruption, which is on Steam. He said, I just released a game. Lots are asking for Steam keys, but we've only sold 100 copies. Is it still wise to give out copies to, say, Steam community groups when your game is not selling as much as you'd like? Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two different ways to look at growth of a project. There's the initial group that you think are going to play your game, buying it, which maybe that was that 100 people. And then there's kind of growing it. So giving away copies is in a way marketing. So I wouldn't give away tons of copies, but definitely giving away some, but with kind of a like, hey, if I give you this copy, will you play my game and give me some feedback, or play my game and leave a Steam review, or vote for it in green light, or whatever. Just try and make sure that they understand that, you haven't sold a lot of copies, but you're giving out copies to help grow the game. I do think there's value in still giving out copies. When I released my book, we gave out a lot of free copies, and those were people that we were pretty sure were going to buy the book, but we knew that them reading the book and giving us feedback and telling their friends was much more valuable. So definitely in groups and things like that, communities where they're talking about games, is a good place to do that. Chris then asked, if you're a perfectionist like me, is it hard to deal with the negative feedback or reviews? Once the game is released, if you aren't going to update it, then I wouldn't even read the reviews. Like I said earlier, it can be pretty hard to deal with it, especially when they're just reiterating what you knew was wrong. But if you're trying to grow from it and grow the game, then you've asked for the feedback, so you need to be open to it and learn from it. But don't take it personally. Take it as a learning experience. He then asked, what do you feel when your game is released? Is it okay to feel empty inside, like some kind of post-launch depression? Yeah, this is a big thing for me. I've wanted to do a talk on this for a long time and do like actual research, but I just haven't had the time on post-ship depression. It's in a lot of ways, I've never been pregnant or been a woman or had a baby, but from my reading, from the not the chemical side, but the finishing side of having a baby is very similar, right? So you've worked very hard on this thing. It's been very precious, and then it comes out and it's not exactly what you wanted, and people are critiquing it and saying negative things about it or positive things about it, and you've been wholly consumed by it, and all of a sudden you don't have that as much. You still have the responsibility of taking care of it, but you're not like the sole person involved in the process, right? And I think that is very prevalent, very huge in our industry, and we never talk about it. And that's why I recommend going on a vacation and getting away from it. So yeah, I think it's really important that you kind of get away and just kind of detox from the project. You need to think about, here's already what I've accomplished with this book, or this game. Sorry, I was reading the comment. Here's what I've accomplished with this game. I'm just gonna step aside and relax. I think we don't often allow ourselves to do that. So cool. Cheryl Smith asked, for designers, in addition to actionable samples, playable levels, demos, etc., would including design documentation be a qualitative addition to a portfolio? I don't think it's a bad thing, but I also think you should expect that people may not read it unless they're specifically looking for someone who does documentation. So if you have it and you're proud of it, yeah, put it on in your portfolio. If you don't have it, don't feel like you need to go make it. Jamie asked, did learning how to code come naturally easy to you? If not, how did you overcome that? I don't think it did. I think the logic of code came easy to me, but the actual syntax of learning like C++ was not easy. I got my first like D ever, really my first non-B or higher grade ever in my first programming class, and I was pretty devastated. I was pretty like, wow, I guess I suck at programming. But what I learned was I just needed to brute force it and just keep coding, and that's that's what I would recommend for anybody who's trying to learn to code. Just keep coding. Just code, write code, write code, write code, and eventually it will start to make sense to you. And if it doesn't, keep asking for help, keep reading, whatever you have to do to figure out how to understand that code. Just keep doing it. But no, it does. I don't think it comes easy to most people. Especially learning a new language and new syntax. I don't think that ever comes easy. And I think you just have to constantly be trying to do things within that language. Eric asks, designer's question. I'm going to be starting the online game design program at Full Sail at the end of the month, but I'm going to have to keep working full time. Would it be better to stay at a job that allows me more time to focus on my schoolwork, or find a job that might supplement what I will be learning? I think at least at the start, having been to Full Sail and knowing the program, at least at the start, having a job that allows you to focus on schoolwork is a really good idea. You really probably aren't going to know enough to go get a job. But if one comes up, like a QA job in your town or something where you can do both, and you feel like you can commit that much time, like literally 80 hours a week to it, then go do it. But I think at least at the beginning of Full Sail, it's really important to focus on Full Sail and not really anything other than that. Jamie asks, what would you identify as the key pillars of success when fostering a successful and productive work environment between production, QA, design, code on a project? Yeah, so the first the first pillar of success is just communication. And I think that it's open, constant, and 365 feedback, which means you're constantly giving feedback as to how communication is going. You're constantly communicating with each other, but constantly growing as a team. I've never been a big fan of siloing, right? Where like production and QA and design and code only talk to people within their group, or that QA can't talk to design or code. They have to go through production. I've always been a big fan of like, hey, this should be constant. These communications should be constantly happening. Having points of contact within QA who are responsible for owning communication with certain people on the team is really important. So I think the first thing really is communication, and then actually making it feel like a team, right? I think one of the things that I often find with QA is that people don't feel like they're developers. They feel like they're just like kind of a second-class citizen who's along for the ride, but they don't feel as important. So fostering that they are important, that they are vital, and that they are part of the team is really, really important. So communication, teamness, I guess, and then really getting everybody in and playing the game is important. I think it's important for people to be seeing the game, because a lot of times QA is really the only people who are playing the game, and they're not playing it in the same way that a dev plays it or the way that a player plays it. And I think getting people in to play the game as a player plays it, but also having them sit and talk to each other about how they play the game is really important. So yeah, so those are some of the key pillars. I think really it's about building that community, that tight knit kind of everybody can communicate with everybody type thing. Zach asked, should artists create portfolio pieces with texture, size, poly count limitations, etc. in mind, or should we always go for the highest fidelity details within reason? So my artist friends always say you should do both. So you should make a super high poly, sexy thing, and then you should show how you've broken it down, baked it down into a low poly that would go in a game. And then if you can show it to me in like UE4 or Unity, something like that, that also shows that you have taken it to the next level and you know how to do that. So really, yeah, doing both is really important. Doug asked, did you give away free copies of your recent book? Yeah, I did. We created like a list of people that we sent out free copies to. Peakman999 asks, I've worked in QA for over a year and I'm looking to move to the dev side, specifically design. What kind of jobs should I be looking for and what should I be looking into? Well, I think first you should be talking about what skills do you have that make you a designer? What actionable skills do you have to make you a designer? And what can you show me that shows me that you're a designer? There's a good example of a guy I worked with who moved from QA to design. And I think one of the things that made me realize, like, hey, this guy should be a designer. This was at Epic. Was when Travis went to the Global Game Jam and sat with the like super high end Epic devs and made a game with them, right? So he showed me that he knew how to do scripting. He was able to jump on a team and do whatever needed to be done to make the project better. And it wasn't that he was just a QA person. So figuring out what your actionable skills are for being a designer is kind of the first thing that I would do. And then the types of jobs you want to be looking for are any type of junior position. Especially systems positions tend to be the best for people straight out of QA, unless you happen to have like a scripting background or have learned to use the engine super well. But yeah, those are all kind of different ways to enter. But I would find out what you do specifically. So yeah, I would really look into what and also what you're interested in doing, right? But building levels, just building a portfolio like any other designer. But you have the added benefit of having seen a game or a project being made for a year and a half, which is awesome. Cheryl asks, due to a family issue following my recent full sail graduation, I am having to work on my own rather than apply for positions in the industry. What are some of the best indie dev resources you can suggest? This is suggested to last about 2 years. Cheryl, I'm sad to hear that you had some family issues, but I'm glad that you're seeing it as a growth opportunity, as a place to really kind of kick ass and do your own thing. There's a lot of great resources online for indie devs. I'm trying to think of the one that people. Wow, my brain is kind of farting right now. But if you really look for on NeoGAF, they have a lot of different indie resources. I'm not saying go join the GAF community, but there's a lot of great indie resources there. The IGDA indie stuff has good resources. I'm also planning on doing an indie panel at some point. It is very overwhelming. Yes, it can be very overwhelming. I think the most important thing is that you just decide what you want to do, build something small, or whatever it is that you want to be doing. So, yeah, don't get overwhelmed though. Just start building something and asking people for help is the best way to do it. Jishan asks, would you recommend pursuing a master's in CS to be more attractive as an engineer to AAA companies? It depends. Do you have a programming background? Do you already have a CS degree or a game programming degree or some sort of programming degree? If you have a bachelor's degree, really, that's all you need if you can code and you've worked on projects. I would say you're probably going to be better spending time just building games and trying to get into a dev studio than you are spending time on a master's program. But if you don't know how to code, then a master's program is maybe a decent way to do it. My biggest problem with computer science is that a lot of times people I've met from computer science degrees are more theoretical when I need them to be more practical, right? Having actually done something. Yeah, if you have a game development bachelor's degree from Full Sail, I don't think you need to go get a master's degree. I think most people, really all you get from a master's degree in the game industry is you may get paid a little bit more, but it's once you have 4 or 5 years of work, it doesn't matter. Peak Man asked, from a creative standpoint with a focus on soft skills, leadership, writing, communication, what is my next jumping off point, learning to code or the like? From a designer perspective, I can never tell people not to learn to code. Really, from any position, I can't say don't learn to code. Learning to script is necessary, in my opinion, for just about any role in design. So you don't have to be like a hardcore programmer, but learning how to use blueprints or something like that is really important. But from the soft skill side, leadership, writing, communication, just jumping on teams, mod teams. If you're still working in QA, trying to tell your lead that you want to have more leadership responsibilities, or you want to work on your communication or writing skills. Maybe you want to start writing the test plans, whatever it may be. Those skills, if you're working in a studio, are probably the easiest ones for you to work on, because you just have to express that, hey, this is something I want to do, to your leads, and then hopefully they'll give you the opportunity to grow into that. Jamie asks, what are the top 3 things that you think the QA industry could do to inspire more folks to pursue a career in QA rather than using it as a stepping stone? Well, I think the first one is there's kind of a problem, but it's not really a bad problem, of a lot of the people who are saying it's a stepping stone. It was a stepping stone, right? They didn't see QA as anything other than a stepping stone. They started out in it, and then they went into it, and then they just kind of went out, right? And I think it's important for those people to talk about people who do career QA. I remember I had never thought of QA as anything but a stepping stone until I actually got to my first studio, and I met people who were career QA people who have been doing QA, not just in games, but just quality assurance in technology, for 15, 20 years. And talking to them and getting to know them and understanding how passionate they were about that was really exciting to me, because it was as excited and as passionate as I was about game design and game programming. So I think when you're talking about QA, showing how it can be a career, right? Like how it can inspire you, and it's crucial to the industry, and it's crucial to the projects. I think one of the things, probably the third thing that the QA industry can do, is figure out how to pay leads and people who are in QA at a competitive rate to other jobs. Because I've met quite a few people who are passionate and love QA, but they're like, hey, if I go and become a designer or a producer, I'm going to make twice as much. So it's hard to tell somebody, hey, stay in QA, if they don't see a growth track to making, a good living. So really defining what a growth track in QA is really important, in my opinion, because a lot of times the growth track in QA is you're QA, you're lead QA, and then you're not QA, right? So there's not a lot of growth track there. So I think really defining what that growth track looks like, how to become QA level 1, QA level 2, and things like that is really important. Kyle asks, as a recent grad, how do you connect with people without worrying about them thinking you only want a job out of them? Well, don't tell them you're a recent grad. Don't tell them you're looking for a job. Just introduce yourself as what you do, right? So when I was fresh out of school, I would constantly just tell people, hi, I'm Grant. I'm a programmer, right? And this is what I like to work on. So I didn't mention the fact that I was in school or graduating from school. I said, I'm a programmer. This is what I like to do. And then ask them questions, right? Ask them about themselves, ask them what inspires them, what they do every day, what their day-to-day looks like. Just start to build a relationship with the person that isn't based on them giving you a job. Really, what I've done in my career, and what has paid off the most for people that have connected with me, is they develop a relationship over 6 or 7 months. And then I may be like, oh, I need somebody who can do this. Oh, there was that guy I talked to. Or, once you've talked to the person for a while, be like, hey, I'm looking for a job kind of doing this, no pressure, but if you know somebody looking, that would be huge. But that's after kind of building a relationship with that person. Doug asks, what might be some of the differences for being a developer at a development studio or a publishing studio? Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. I've never really worked for a publishing studio, but I've worked with publishing studios. And being a dev at a publishing studio tends to mean you get thrown on fires. So you might get thrown on Project X for 6 weeks to 6 months. And you're working kind of external from the team, but you're still part of the team. It's a little weird. Oh, excuse me. It's a little weird to describe what exactly I mean by that. But basically, like, you're working with the people, but they may treat you a little bit different than if you were sitting right next to them, part of the team every day. Because you're coming from the man. You're a publishing person. A lot of the publishing devs that I've worked with have been QA, and they just kind of get thrown onto projects for a while, and it's really hard for them to get ramped up to exactly your development practices. That's really the biggest thing about being a publishing developer, is when you get thrown onto a new team, you have to learn their new practices. You have to learn how they work, what kind of methodologies they use, what tools they use, and stuff like that. So that's a little bit different. I think when you're a developer in a studio, you're working with a consistent team every day. You've been working on a project for X amount of time. You've been using the same tools. You probably aren't really talking to a bunch of new people every day. So yeah, I think it's definitely a different experience. I've never, like I said, never been a developer at a publishing house. Maybe one day, but it's definitely different. Yeah, keep asking questions as you come up with them, and I will keep answering them. Thank you all so much for being here. Kyle asked, what would you do if you want to work at a very specific studio? For instance, right now I'm trying to work at either Massive or Reflections. I like the location and projects. Yeah, well, I think understanding that you may not go there right away is really important, and that maybe your goals will change. When I left school, I really wanted to work for PopCap. They were like my go-to company. I really wanted to work for PopCap. They were like the gold standard for casual games, and I loved making casual games. So I really wanted to work there. And so I started to meet people that worked at PopCap or in Seattle who knew people who worked at PopCap, and just kind of started to develop this relationship and friendship with them. And then I started asking, like, hey, what does it look like to be a a programmer at PopCap? What does it look like to be a designer at PopCap? What does it look like to be whatever at this studio? How do I get there? And then sometimes they'll get you in touch with the people who are doing the job that you want to be doing, and you can show them your portfolio or just ask them a simple question of, hey, I'm not sure I'm ready to be there, but here's where I am in my career, and I want to know how I get to there or to where you are. How do I get to your job? Yeah, you could be like Mark and just jump straight into it. I mean, some people do go straight to their dream studios. I've been lucky to work at two of my dream studios. But what's really interesting is the first studio I worked at was better than I had dreamed working in the game industry could be. So I think it's really important to know that you may not go straight to Reflections or Massive. You may go somewhere else first and learn, and then go to those places. But it's good to keep in mind of how to get there. But yeah, I think also becoming like kind of obsessed with their games and really understanding what drives them. Like all of Massive's games are kind of the same, right? Like how are they similar? What does a Massive game look like? What makes it different? And kind of learning their methodologies is really important as well. So knowing their games, playing their games, of course, is important too. Nathalie asked, what advice do you have on keeping in touch with recruiters trying to get in after an unsuccessful interview? Yeah, I think it's always important to follow up with recruiters, and even the hiring managers, even if you are unsuccessful, just to say thanks for your time. Thanks for chatting with me. If things didn't work out now, it'd be cool if, I'm going to keep working on the things that you said I wasn't great at, and hopefully I can, apply again at a later date. Recruiters, their job is to be connected with people. So, chatting with them, say a different job comes up and you want to see if you can work there, calling them and being like, or sending them an email and being like, oh, hey, I know this job didn't work out, but there's this other job that you guys have open that I think would be really good for me. I was just curious if we could chat about that. They're not going to be mad or offended or be like, oh, I don't care about this person. Why are they talking to me? Because it's their job to fill those roles, and they're going to try and fill them with qualified people. And if your interview that was unsuccessful was still positive in a lot of ways, then they are going to want to hire you at some point once you've solved whatever it was that was not good enough for them or not exactly what they wanted. These are great questions. Thanks for asking them, everybody. Feel free to ask more in the chat, and I will keep answering them until people stop asking them, and then I will go do something else with the rest of my evening, probably play Fortnite or Overwatch. Nathalie followed up, do you think you should wait a certain amount of months before applying / reaching out? I mean, I would reach out, like, at least to say thank you for the interview right away, but then I would wait. Yeah, I would wait probably 3 months. Unless what they said to you was like, you fundamentally do not have enough experience by X years, then you gotta wait some time. But yeah, I think reaching out, I would wait at least 3 months and then reach out. Jamie asks, how much coffee is too much coffee when on crunch? Yeah, so I don't drink coffee. I was very lucky to have abandoned caffeine before I got into college, and it's made me able to survive without it. The yawns that you're seeing are not due to sleepiness, but are due to other other things like allergies and stuff like that. So that's not from lack of caffeine. What I do is I do like dance parties, right? So I get myself up and I dance a little. I usually also don't sit. This is kind of weird. I'm sitting right now. I usually stand when I work, but the light is super bad at my standing desk, and so you guys would be looking into the sun the whole time. So, yeah, I think as far as how much coffee do I have prepared, copious amounts. Exceptionally copious amounts, but at the same time, I will fight tooth and nail with every fiber of my being until I stop making video games to kill crunch. Any crunch more than 2 weeks is negative for your people, negative for your project, and honestly just poor planning, poor leadership, and just not good. I know in QA you guys get the brunt end of crunch, just like audio does too. So I fully sympathize with that. It was interesting. Bungie, there was an interesting article about Bungie today where they were talking about how they finally killed mandatory crunch with Destiny 2. So super proud of those guys. Now keep in mind that doesn't mean that there isn't voluntary crunch where people work extra hard to get things in games. But even that, if people are volunteer crunching, I would never let them do more than 2 weeks. And I would try and ask them to keep it below 60 hours a week during those 2 weeks. Sorry, you said the C word and I went off. Eric asked, would you say that it's better to move to a location where there are a lot of studios to work for, or wait for the job first and then relocate? It really depends on your experience level. I know people who have done both. I've always relocated for a job, but if you're starting out and you're completely in the desert and there's no studios near you and you can't find anything, it might be worth going to a city where there are a lot of devs and just digging into the community. But that's going to cost money. And if you don't have a job, then you'll probably end up getting a job that isn't in your industry, and then you'll be too tired to work on your portfolio. So those are the things that I often tell people. Like, if you can stay where you are until and work on your portfolio and work on games without blowing all your money, then do that before moving to a new place and hoping that you get a job that way. Almost every job, unless it's a part-time job, will pay to move you. Or at least help you in some way. Doug, I'm playing on PC. I don't own any consoles. What do I do to try and prevent crunch? Yeah, so I do a lot of different things. I wrote a book about this. A lot of the different things that are in GearUp are specifically ways to help deal with crunch, right? To prevent it. So you want to make sure that the planning makes sense, that you have goals that are concrete and people understand what is being done and why they're doing what they're doing. And then scoping early, I think, is really important. Basically, figuring out the minimum of every feature and getting to that as quickly as possible. I mean, the goal should be when you're hitting crunch time, all you should be doing is polishing. When normal crunch time hits, all you should be doing is polishing. Yeah, when you posted that you're in Minnesota, I was going to say I think I'm pretty sure Doug is there too. So I was actually, just there's a couple different groups in Minnesota, and then Wisconsin also has some as well. So depending on where you are in Minnesota, you may not be too far away from other people. Cheryl says, I've been approved for ID at Xbox with the choice of going the creator program or for the full ID Xbox program. The current project could do either. One would require full-on business name entity. While the other does not, what are some of the best methods to weigh the options of taking on a full business entity versus individually publishing? Yeah, I think that the most important thing is figuring out when you start an entity. Obviously, you're paying taxes, you're paying extra things like that, but you do get some protection. It's not too hard to start a business. I think figuring out which one is going to help you the best. I mean, I recommend, if you're going to self-publish something, just self-publish it on Steam or on a mobile store. Being approved for ID at Xbox is awesome. Using their resources is really great. But yeah, I think it really can go either way. Hey, so Eric and Doug, you guys are in the same town. That's amazing. Yeah, you should definitely hang out. Look at that, gigs bringing people together since, when was the first one of these? I wrote that down somewhere. Since 2015. Wow, been doing this for a while. Kyle asks, is it wise to contact a recruiter and let them know you're interested in that studio months in advance, even if no position is open? Yeah, totally. If they don't have a position open for you, they may have one and it just may not be posted. I think it's totally fine to be like, hey, most places have like a general submission process, just submitting your resume and being like, I'd really love to work here. Here's my skill set and here's what I'd love to do. I didn't see an open position, but if you could keep me in mind, but also keep an eye out. And once they do post that position, you should look it up. Cool. Nathan asks, what are some good first steps that a senior developer could take if they wanted to transition into game design from a different programming career, such as web development? Yeah, I think just programming games. I've worked with quite a few programmers who started out doing something completely different. One of the guys on one of my teams now, he's only been making games for about a year, but he's been programming for 10 years. And he's one of the fastest developers I've ever worked with, and his code is really good. I think knowing how to code and knowing how to think in code is the most important thing. So maybe making a couple games. And when I say make games, a lot of people balk at that, and I want to be very clear. When I'm saying make a portfolio piece game, it doesn't have to be an original idea. You can just make, I don't know, just remake Pong to start with. You can make any game that's already been made just to show that you made it. And I think when you're transitioning from other programming to game programming, it's important that you make a game and show people, hey, I'm just a good programmer. Zach asked, how do you feel about VR? Is it being heavily embraced by studios, or are most still cautious about it? Pretty much every studio that I've had as a client, and every studio I've worked with in the last few years, including id and Epic, is pretty heavy into VR. I think they're being cautious from it as investing too much money in it because the returns aren't there yet. But almost every studio I know is working on VR something, and I think it's still a couple years away from consumers buying them because they're really expensive right now. And I think by the time we really get to that point, mixed reality is going to be what everybody's doing. So HoloLens, Magic Leap, those types of things I think are really, when they pan out, everybody's going to abandon VR and just go straight to that stuff. But I think that VR is a cool place now, and it's really fun to play with, and it's fun to work on. So pretty cool. Yeah, Cheryl, you have to have an entity for Steam. Yeah, I think just having a business entity is going to make your like I do contract and consulting work, and I was doing it as an individual sole proprietor, but then I decided to make a business entity, and it just made everything way easier. I'm not used to talking for the whole time. I'm used to just asking questions, so my throat is a little dry. Um, Eric asks, are there third-party recruiters in game development, or are they typically in-house? Both. Um, there's big companies like Game On Recruiting and stuff like that that studios will hire to recruit people. Definitely both though, and you'll get reached out to from both. The third-party recruiters usually, once you've had some experience, they'll help you find a job too. So you can just call a recruiter and be like, "Hey, I want to work in this city." So I've worked with recruiters before. They're pretty awesome. Um, Kyle asks, being that you're trained as a programmer and have worked in production, how do you handle multiple tool sets in AAA? I've also worked in design. Yeah, it's really interesting because production, it's good to know a little bit of everything. So that's how it's kind of paid off for me. How do I handle having the multiple tool sets? Well, I just apply for the jobs that I find interesting, and I work for the people that I want to work for. My clients now, I do, I do code reviews to um, production work to design work. I really do it all, and I'm lucky that I have that skill set, and I've worked really hard to have that skill set. But at the same time, I think it's really important to be a master of one of them. For me, that's become production. It was design was like my main focus for many years, and programming was obviously what I started in. But I think it's important to have like a great grasp on one of them, like and be like, this is where I want to stick for a long time. But then kind of learning the other things is important as well, because then you can just have better conversations with people. No matter what tool set you have, the most important part is going to be communication. Um, Jamie asks, how do you feel about outsourcing art, audio, QA, etc.? It depends on the project. So, some of the clients I work with now are smaller, so they outsource a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm an outsourced producer for them. Um, and I think it's really cool in a sense that a small core team of people can make a really big game because they're outsourcing, their audio, their art, and some of the other stuff. Um, uh, but QA is really the one that I balk the most at outsourcing. I really want my QA team to be like as fully integrated as possible with my team. I really want art and audio as well, but you can kind of, I hate to say this, and all my audio friends are going to kill me, but you can kind of pull audio in the last like third of development. A good game is not going to be done that way, um, but yeah, I think outsourcing, we're just going to continue to see outsourcing grow in all spaces, because AAA games, which I even kind of hesitate to call it AAA because they're really quad A games. Like the amount of people making these games is just absurd. When you look at a game like PUBG, which is being made by like 15, 16 people plus some outsourcers, and you compare it to something like Doom that was like 300, 400 people, it's just ridiculous. And I mean, you can tell in the production qualities that more people worked on it, but I think feasibly most studios are only going to exist by doing outsourcing. Doug asks, when will you learn art and audio so you can have a little bit of all the skill sets? Well, I do know audio. I've actually published audio in games before. I just don't like to tell people that because I'm not that good at it, but I have done that before. I do have art in some published games if you count like videos and things like that, but I cannot build art. I've done it. Like if I went in Maya and you asked me to make something, I could make it eventually. It would just take me an inordinately a long time. But I am familiar with it. I've worked in Maya and 3D Max. I've done animation and stuff like that. It's one of those things where it's just I choose not to do those things because I don't find them as interesting or fun, just because I'm not good at them. But I know if I tried really hard, I could probably get decent at some of them. I don't think I could ever get. I could never be a concept artist. Like that's just I can't draw a stick figure. So Doug asks, what do I think about building games off store-bought assets? It's great. It's an awesome way to make games, really. I mean, like, 90% of players aren't going to be able to tell you that this is an animation or a gun from, like, a pack off the asset store. They won't know. They don't care. And what that does is it really is allowing a lot more people to get involved in game development because they, I don't need to go outsource a whole set of guns when I can just go on the asset store and buy a whole pack for $60. And I think it's great for the developers who are building those packs too, because they're out there just churning out things that they find fun and they're making money off of it. I know quite a few people who are doing that, and I think it's a really interesting way to make games. My only concern is if all the games start looking samesies, but I don't think that'll happen because a lot of people start games and never finish making them. Nathalie asks, how does someone get experience and the skills needed for an art or audio producer if their current job is completely unrelated? That is an incredibly excellent question. I'm going to kind of extrapolate the details of that and just talk specifically about how do you develop skills for a job that you want when the current job you have is not that. Producer is a little bit harder, so I'm going to talk about this in general, and then I'll come back to producer. In general, you just got to start doing it, right? You got to start learning it. So if you're an artist who wants to become a tech artist, then the best thing for you to do is to start doing tech art, right? To start writing shaders and tool plugins and whatever it may be that you need to do to learn that. And if you're at a job where that isn't an option, or you're not currently something you're doing, then tell people, hey, I want to learn to do this. Maybe they'll help you learn it. From a producer standpoint, that's really interesting because I don't see too many. I mean, I've been all the types of producers. I've done audio, I've done art, I've done programming and design. I've done them as mixed teams, and I don't really see there being that much different. I think having an understanding of what that position does and knowing their language a little bit, so knowing how to talk about audio and like recording sessions and getting actors and doing things like that it's really valuable to know that stuff. From an art producer standpoint, knowing how to do dailies and move people through the art pipeline, understanding what an art pipeline looks like. Those types of things you can just learn from doing research. And then if you can jump onto a project, either where you work or somewhere else, learning those skills, I think that's really important. Jacob asks, I'm looking at getting a certification with CompTIA Project Plus certification for my current job. Do you feel that certifications like this would be beneficial for obtaining a job in the industry? What I always tell people about certifications is learning is invaluable. No matter what people tell you, learning a new skill is great. If you pay someone to learn that new skill, or you have a job pay someone to teach you that new skill, and you get a certificate, that's cool. It's a talking point for your resume, but what I often tell people is it's not crucial, right? Like I'm not a PMP certified or Scrum certified or any of those things, but I promise you, I know Scrum better than 90% of people who have gone and got the certification because I've been using it for 13 years, right? And I think that that's the most important thing. If you know the theory behind something, that's great, but until you know how to use it in application, that those letters, those words mean nothing to me, except one thing. So they do mean something, I guess, that you're willing to spend your money to go learn or take advantage of the opportunities given to you to learn. If at this moment right now someone came and said, I will pay for you to go take a Scrum certification course, I would do it. I would do it in a heartbeat. Or a PMP course, I would do it in a heartbeat. Because if someone else wanted to pay for me to go take one of those super expensive courses, then I'm in. But I'm not gonna spend my money. Yeah, I was trained on the streets. I learned in the trenches. But that being said, I do not think if someone else is paying for it, I will never poo-poo that. And I think having any sort of certification in project management or development or anything is just, it's another mark on your resume, which is a good thing. All right, we got about 5 minutes left. So if anybody has any more questions, hurry up and write them in the chat. Thank you for your great questions. I wasn't sure if we would be doing this for like 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but it's been almost an hour and we've had lots of questions. These are great questions. So yeah, keep asking them. And if nobody else has any questions in the next couple of minutes, then I will sign off. Otherwise, I'll just sit here and dance. Jamie asks, what is next in the future of Shonk? Yeah, so still some plans on some things to do with the book. Kind of on hold right now because Clinton has been on vacation and he's been traveling, and so we didn't want to do anything. We didn't want to do anything until then. But yeah, some things with the books, and then I'm just doing client work and I'm traveling a lot. So I'm going to try and do these every month, but there are times that I won't be able to do it. I think at the end of October, or the one in November probably won't happen because I'm going to be in Spain. So the timing would be very, very strange to do that. So Kyle asked, best way to tackle learning AI. You were looking at one of the worst AI programmers in the world. No, so I'm not great at AI. But what I can say is just start building it, just like anything. Read forums. There's lots of AI websites. The AI SIG for the IGDA is incredible. It's one of my favorite SIGs. Yeah, so check that stuff out. The next couple of months, we have the gigs coming up. We're probably going to do a VFX panel next month is the plan. And then we are probably going to do an indie panel either. So one of those two is going to be next month. I'm just finalizing the people that said that they would do them. But I know a lot of people on here are starting their own indie studios, and I want to get that information. But we also have not covered VFX artists, and they are an entire branch of the industry, and they are amazing people. So I want to make sure we get some time to chat to them. Eric asks, how do you deal with travel or relocating for jobs in general? Yeah, usually when you get a job, they get a relocation expert or they give you money to do it. In general, I travel a lot, so it's pretty simple for me to just jump on a plane and go somewhere. Most of my belongings fit in 2 bags, but I also basically travel for a living. So yeah, just being ready to move at any time I think is really important. Cheryl, the design panel that we did had a systems designer on it, so if you haven't watched that one, maybe check that out. But I definitely can do a more in-depth systems designer one at some point. Yeah, so thank you all for being here. Thank you for the amazing questions, and I will see you all next month. Later.